It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Pelesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Aloha and good morning. Great to see so many already tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Pelesuji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we head over to Washington, D.C. as we turn our attention to Red Hill.
That's right. Joining us live from her office at the Pentagon is Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment, Meredith Berger. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Aloha and good afternoon from the Pentagon. Welcome and thank you for having me.
Well, we're so glad to speak with you this morning. We want to get into the we know that your area of interest and sort of purview for this project is really the decommissioning of the facility itself. So we wanted to get into some of the discussions that you're having about what should happen to the tanks themselves. But before we get there, there's an article in today's Honolulu Star-Advertiser talking about the most recent incident involving those so-called forever chemicals and a report that was due to the EPA that the Navy is now asked for more time on. What can you tell us about that extension and what's going on with that report?
Absolutely, and you're exactly right. You made an important point that I'd like to hit on. So the Joint Task Force is focused on defueling, and the Department of the Navy is focused on closure, two very big tasks that are related. So we are working together every day, but to make sure we do both right, we've got those kind of distinct roles and responsibilities. To your question on the article from this morning, yes, we were able to provide some but not all information to the EPA. So we got the request on some historical data, provided what we did have readily available, but recognized that with the breadth of the question, we had to dig back into some historical data. So we went back with what we had and asked EPA for an extension because we need to kind of go through all of these archives, want to make sure that we get all of the data correct, complete, and accurate in line with what EPA has asked for. And so we are working purposefully on that and taking the time to do it right.
And just to clarify, so a lot of the information that is being gathered are more historical information that you're trying to get about the facility, or if you can put into context about just the spill itself, what happened, and the missing or the information that you're still working on gathering.
Absolutely. So EPA was interested in some more comprehensive and historical data. And the base actually used to not be Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, but a whole bunch of individual different service bases. And so we have to go back into data that precedes when everything was actually joint to when it was all individual services. And so making sure that we go back and correctly collect that.
Let's talk about now the decommissioning versus the defueling. I know that you did say that there are different entities sort of taking this on. Tell us specifically about what your role is in all of this and how these two initiatives are sort of moving forward in, tandem.
Absolutely. And so we have the Joint Task Force that is in charge of defueling. And those are the efforts that are going to be the first step in moving towards the closure of Red Hill, which will come afterwards. So as Joint Task Force has defueling, I, with the Department of Navy role, am in charge of the closure of the facility. And so we are working together, as I noted, because of how interrelated these pieces are. But we cannot fully start with closure process until the defueling is certified by the Joint Task Force as complete. So what we are looking to do is see where there are some interdependencies, some of the starting work that we can do for closure as the Joint Task Force is working on their defueling efforts. And in the aggregate, we are always looking for ways to move as quickly as possible, but most importantly, as safely as possible across the entirety of the effort. So as we look at closure, we have submitted to the Department of Health all of the different courses of action that are possible in terms of closure of the facility, and we are waiting to hear back from the Department of Health for an approval on a way forward. And that's where we are right now in terms of closure. One thing that's very exciting that we're thinking about is how we move forward for a beneficial reuse there. Importantly, not with fuel, not with any sort of toxic chemical or other presence there, but truly a beneficial, so for good reuse of that facility as we think about going forward. But first things first, waiting to hear back from the Department of Health for an approved way forward.
Can you talk a little bit about what some of that decommission and the future of Red Hill might look like? You'd mentioned some exciting moments. I mean, what are some of the conversations happening about what happens to this facility once the defueling, once the decommission is complete, and what this site becomes?
Absolutely. So we are very much at the front end of this process, which means a lot of opportunity. But what we are looking forward to is engaging with the community on how we might be able to use this going forward, and how we can best implement some ideas from the community. And so we actually just hired a local business that is going to help us to gather up and solicit these ideas, and then help us in partnership with the Department of Health and other folks on island to think through what those best options are. And we don't even know fully what the possibilities are out there, but we anticipate that the community and that other inputs will be creative and innovative and things that will be beneficial for the community. So really looking forward to engaging in that process. We'll have more to provide people in the coming little bit here as we get started with the new company that we just hired, but very collaborative, very community inclusive process is where we are going as we look at beneficial reuse options.
So let's talk about that reuse, because I think that there has been some trepidation expressed on behalf of the Board of Water Supply. Ernie Lau, who's the chief engineer there, basically says, we need to shut this down in its entirety. We don't want, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, someone to change course. And even though promises are made today about not reusing it for a fuel or chemical based project, that could happen if the facility remains intact. What are some things, would this be water storage? What do you envision is even possible? It's hard for, the general public. We're not engineers. We don't know. What are some things that you think could make the argument to actually repurpose the facility?
Well, let me address first the concern, because it's important that people understand that through the planning process and the closure process, we are making it so that these tanks are not fit for fuel reuse. So all of those considerations are off the table as we go through the cleaning, as we go through other steps for closure, as we are venting and making sure that all of the fuel down to what is called the tank bottoms are cleaned out and removed. So it is a very purposeful regulatory process. And by regulatory, I mean people besides the Department of the Navy and those who are working with us to execute this will make sure that we are following the process of cleaning to make sure that we are compliant with the closure requirements. So there is a check on that to make sure that we are not going to be doing anything other than what we commit to, which is closure with a beneficial reuse. And so as we explore those options, it's a vast space, and it has incredible potential and possibility for a variety of uses. I don't know what all of them are yet, and I don't want to presuppose because I know that there are people who are going to have some great ideas. But can we use it towards something that would help with water, with energy? Hawaii has these incredible renewable energy standards in terms of the portfolio. Is there some innovative use there? But those are the types of things that I'm thinking about every day in my portfolio. And I know that the leadership in Hawaii, the communities in Hawaii are thinking about how to do things like that too. And so I think big. We're going to try and do the same, and then partner with the company that we just hired to make sure that we've got a good process to get to a result.
From a logistical standpoint, when you're talking about this process of defueling and then the decommissioning efforts that will follow, on your end, are you having to wait until the entire defueling process is complete, or are you able to maybe come in as a few tankers are done, and so there is some overlap to help expedite the timeline? I mean, if you can explain to that, because there are a lot of tankers that need to be defueled, and is that process requiring all of them to be fueled before your process even starts with the decommissioning aspect?
And this is a place where the collaboration between the Joint Task Force and their defueling responsibilities and my with the Department of Navy closure responsibilities really overlap. And it's why we are talking every day and keeping each entity focused on these critical components of the whole of our effort. And so there is always a possibility that we will find efficiencies and overlaps and other opportunities to expedite our work. And we are constantly looking for those. That is part of the daily conversations that happen. But as we are on the front end of a lot of these efforts, there aren't any specific places that I could identify. But Ryan, the things that you mentioned are exactly what we are thinking about and talking about, and where we can find some pieces of closure to include the community engagement that I just mentioned that we can do now. Some of the planning pieces that we can do now. We are taking every step to make sure that we are not wasting time as we move forward, but prioritize that safety element.
We always like to bring in questions from the audience, and I think this is one that we all have, which is the facility truly able to be cleaned up of any and all contaminants? I mean, given how long fuel was stored in that space, and the issues that we know have to do with the linings and just, the overall sort of integrity of those structures, is it able to actually be cleaned up to be repurposed? Do we know that yet?
So there is a regulatory process that is in place, and it involves everything from the way that people do the cleaning to how long they can spend inside of a tank, to the process and number of times that different parts of tanks are cleaned, to how everything is disposed of and transported. And so because of the regulators and all of the policies and processes that they have written out, we know what the standards and expectations are, and we are planning to meet all of those along the way. And so complying with the regulations and the very, very specific tasks that are set up to achieve closure under those rules, that's what we're doing to make sure that we are compliant and to make sure that we do everything that is required for closure of the tanks and the facility.
Can you give us an update of what's actually happening right now? Because has defueling begun? The last we talked, I believe, to an official, they said that there was a lot of repairs that needed to be done before that could start. If you can give our viewers here and just the general public a sense of where we are in this timeline and what is actually happening right now in this process.
And so this is one that Joint Task Force Commander Admiral John Wade is the ultimate speaking authority on in terms of what is happening right now today. And that is why he is on island. And I know that you all probably get to see a lot of him around the community because he's trying to do exactly that. Make sure that people know what is going on and when, and to be that on island voice as we are all watching the defueling process. I know that he and his team are making sure that they are paying attention to all of the steps that are in the Department of Defense's defueling plan, staying in close collaboration with the Department of Health and other regulators and other community leaders to make sure that at every step of the way there's information. He has been focused lately on a lot of the repairs and other elements that need to take place to ensure safe defueling. But as far as exactly where he is today, I will defer to a very good leader who has been focused on this.
And we have had the pleasure of speaking with him in the past. I want to ask you, and this might fall under the same category, but I do want to ask you about the issue of the cameras. There has been a lot of questions as to why the Navy is not able to get a full surveillance system up and running in time to make sure that the public and the Navy itself can actually record and go back if necessary, the defueling process. Do you know how much of the, where the camera repairs are at this point, and why, the estimation is that it will not be fully up and running when the defueling actually begins?
So you're exactly right. Joint Task Force is overseeing all of these pieces right now. But what I do know is that in terms of making sure that there is good visibility over all of the actions that are happening, Admiral Wade is focused on making sure, with good support from the whole joint team that is part of the task force, making sure that we are having cameras up where we can. If there is not a camera, a person, but overall visibility, and then closely coordinating with all of the regulators and leaders to make sure that we are focusing on safety, creating that visibility, and ensuring that there is good communication along the way.
There is just still a lot of concern in the community about this process and hesitation, of course, after this most recent spill that, of course, happened with this fire hazard chemicals and the forever chemicals that were spilled that we talked about at the beginning of this show as we continue to wait for that report. But what is your response to those in the community who continue to be very weary of this process, are concerned about future spills during this decommission and this defueling process? I guess, what are the steps that the Navy is taking to ensure that more damage isn't done to the aquifer or just to the general environment in the area?
So the Department of the Navy, the Joint Task Force, the whole Department of Defense recognizes and takes very seriously that when we are present in a community, we are part of that community. Not only are we working and operating there, but we're living there. We are doing all of the things that are part of what make Hawaii, no matter where you are across the state, special. And so when something happens that is impactful to the environment, to those things that everybody collectively treasures, it is something that the DoD community feels, recognizes as well. And so there is that connection that we all feel, that those on island especially feel, in terms of when there is an impact. And so when you speak of the community being weary and wondering about all of these things, it is something that your DoD folks and your military families are also feeling the same way. And so that it really is a community feeling. But as we look at how we are going forward and thinking about safety, when that spill did happen, Joint Task Force Commander Admiral Wade and his team exercised a quick safety response. Something unfortunate happened there, absolutely. But he was able to respond quickly with his team and in collaboration with state regulators and leaders to make sure that there was a response that was as quick as it could be. And so that's an indicator of lessons learned. It's an indicator that the defueling plan is working, because safety response and practice was one of the required parts in there that showed that it worked here. And so we every day are focusing to make sure that we are taking every care and precaution. And if something happens, despite what are careful, focused, and best efforts, that we can respond in the best way. But every day, everybody is waking up, making sure that they are doing their best to protect the environment, health, safety, community, because everybody who is working on this also has ownership in the things that make that community so special.
On the subject of health and community, there's a question here from Kat, and we get these questions from time to time, just about the health issues that some of the families who were exposed are facing. Has the Assistant Secretary received reports on the ongoing new illnesses or symptoms in families since the toxic exposure in 2021? How closely are you tracking these physical impacts? We know that there's been a new clinic open to try to address some of these health issues. What are you hearing about what's happening there?
So much like we've been talking about the Joint Task Force and the responsibilities of the Department of the Navy, we have focused the Defense Health Agency to make sure that we are helping with the clinic and looking at symptoms and understanding what sorts of illnesses and other impacts people are feeling. Regardless of where you are or what you are doing, anyone across the Department of Defense will help you get to the right place if you are having an impact, feeling sick, if your family or friends are feeling sick. And I would be glad to make sure that you have all of the right contact information so that people can easily access these resources. And I'm not sure if there's more that you can post it, but I would like to make sure that everybody has direct access to it. But it is the Defense Health Agency has focused on these clinics, ensuring that we are aggregating information and that most importantly, we are giving people a place to go so that they can be taken care of.
When we talk about decommission, it's not only the decommissioning of the facility itself. We also know that there are individuals that will have to get reassigned. There are many people that are currently working in the facility, whether it be through this cleanup efforts or otherwise just day-to-day maintenance. In the decommissioning of that, what will happen to all those who have been assigned to Red Hill? Will they remain in some sort of capacity in operating the facility? What does the personnel that manages that facility look like through this decommissioning process?
Well, we've got a few years in this process, and so we'll continue to have people there, but that's one of the interesting questions in terms of the beneficial reuse as well. We may have new opportunities for those people. It may change the way that their responsibilities are, and so that's something that I would need to consult with all of the commands on, as well as they think about what the best allocations are for Navy and other personnel. And then with contractors, we'll have to reassess those needs as we go forward and see what other opportunities are there. But at this point, it is too soon to make any calls about what that will look like.
I'm interested, as you weigh the different opportunities that could exist within the repurposing of this facility or perhaps a full-scale shutdown, who ultimately makes that decision? Is that something that you're going to be coordinating with the new administration? Is that something that's up to the Department of Health here in Hawaii? Who has the final say as to what happens to the facility itself?
In terms of the closure methodology or the reuse, or both?
Both. Well, not necessarily the methodology of the closure, but what happens to the tanks themselves. Let's say that, the defueling goes as planned. We all really want you to succeed, the Navy to succeed in this effort, of course. Let's say they're successfully drained, cleaned out. Ultimately, what happens to them next? Whose call is that?
So this is a call that we will make in collaboration with the community, with our partners at the Department of Health, and we'll do it through that process that we have not yet set up. And so it is a Navy facility. And so we are ultimately, because it is our facility, in charge of making that disposition. But this is a place where we are eagerly seeking the collaboration and inputs of the community, because it is something that we want to do thoughtfully and together. But if we are talking specifically, it is a Navy facility, so we are the owners of it.
Can you give us an idea of just how much conversation is being had between all those stakeholders that you've been mentioning this morning, as well as with the local lawmakers here? Have you had the opportunity to meet with Governor Green and the new administration, the Department of Health officials? If you can talk about just the day-to-day or weekly dialogues, how frequent are these conversations happening, these updates, and how informed are our local lawmakers about this process?
So every time I am on island, I am really honored that the leadership of the state of Hawaii will make time to meet with me to make sure that we're continuing our conversations and collaboration on a daily basis. There is collaboration among those who are working specifically on both the defueling and also the closure efforts to make sure that we are staying lockstep in terms of understanding and information as we create supplements for each of the plans, that we are answering the questions in the right way. And so very thankful that we have a close collaborative relationship, and it is one every time I am on island. I'm grateful to be able to spend that time well. I have to note that I'm so excited about the governor's priorities and everything that he recently put out. It really closely aligns with what I do every day in my assistant secretary role. And so as he's thinking about exciting things like energy, taking climate action, I was thrilled to see that he put funding towards the climate fund. Really thinking through housing challenges. How are we good environmental stewards? How do we make sure that we are doing things that are holistically good for the community? That is this kind of stuff that I get to think about. And so part of my visits too, and these engagements with leadership, are to think about how we work together on some of these really big things that we can go forward on. And so I mentioned Hawaii having this really impressive renewable energy portfolio standard. The Department of Navy, and specifically within my portfolio, we are charging towards some pretty aggressive energy markers ourselves. Similarly, in terms of climate action, we are doing ourselves a disservice from a mission and a military perspective if we do not work thoughtfully, purposefully, innovatively, and aggressively when it comes to climate action. And so those are some of the conversations that I'm having too. I actually got to meet the governor when he was lieutenant governor just a little while ago when I was out for the groundbreaking for Kapono Solar out in Eva. And we were there together, and we were talking about how this was just one of many projects that the Department of Navy can do with the state to start moving forward on some of these energy and climate objectives. And so I know this is a little off of what the rest of what we were talking about were, but that's how I spend the rest of my time when I come out and go see some of our readiness and environmental protection projects that actually will help in terms of the aquifer. We put about $15 million out to do watershed restoration and reforesting that will help to improve the health of the aquifer, because we know that nature heals nature best, and that's where we should put our investments. So those are some of the other things that I'm thinking hard about and working with the state on, because we have just a tremendous opportunity to advance some of our mutual goals. And I'm really, really excited about it. And that is something I enjoy talking about every time I'm there.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you about just building trust in our community. You know, I look at the comments, I'm not going to read all of them, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of trepidation about the military's presence and whether or not they will be able to execute the defueling and properly, you know, do the right thing when it comes to the decommissioning of the facility itself. How do you regain trust, and what steps are you specifically taking to try to engage the community so that, you know, we all feel like we also have an input? Because ultimately, as you did mention, it is the Navy's facility, so it's in the Navy's purview to do what the Navy will do. So how do you, you know, reestablish trust between the community and your agency?
Well, trust is always earned. And so we are in a constant everyday process of earning trust. And there are days that you gain it, and there are days that you lose it. And for every single day, we are looking to earn, we are looking to gain, we are looking to continue to build. And we do that through conversations like the one that we're having right now, through making sure that we are paying attention to the things that people raise up. So I am grateful every time that there are community meetings and there are forums like this where people can raise concerns and repeat them when they are not healed yet, because that is how we continue to move forward, continue to understand, continue to talk, continue to hear diversity of perspectives, to make sure that we are making the most informed steps forward. And I know that every single day I wake up and I think about how we are going to do better. How can we make sure that we are moving things forward? I know that Admiral Wade is doing the same thing, as you see other on-island military leaders like Admiral Barnett. There is not a day that goes by that each of us is not waking up thinking about this, much like the members of the community are. And so it is a day-by-day process that we take seriously. We recognize that this is a unique, beautiful, sacred, strategic place. And so as we look at it from all of the different angles and value Hawaii for everything that it is, we are trying every day to demonstrate that in every forum, in every conversation, whether it is one-on-one or a big conversation like the audience that you all hold. And we'll keep doing that and give us the recommendations if there are other things that we should be doing. And we continue the conversation, and that's how you build trust and keep earning it.
Well, we thank you so much, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Meredith Berger. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and providing that update. We hope to have you back on the show in the months to come to get an update on where things stand, but appreciate your time this morning.
Well, I'd be honored. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thank
Aloha.
you.
Thanks.
Well, great to hear from her. We appreciate the Navy making, the Secretary available to talk to us. She, of course, as we noted, is in charge of the decommissioning of the facility, not the defueling. That's under the purview of Admiral Wade, who we have had on the program before. If you missed that conversation, you can go back to the archives and watch it. She did say that they are, of course, moving in conjunction with each other. You can't have a decommissioning without the defueling first, and they're trying to see what they can try to accomplish now. They have engaged a local firm, Nakupuna Company, to try to figure out what some of those options are. They will be holding community meetings and weighing different options. There's really no answer, Ryan, as to what this could be repurposed as. So we're just going to have to wait to see what those proposals are and what is even possible.
Yeah, we weren't able to get a answer on that. As she said, that the timeline just doesn't really allow for that at this point because they haven't really begun that process. She said the big part of that process will be the community engagement and really committing to hearing from the community about what they believe that facility should look like and the use for that after. She did mention that it could be possibly something tied to the state's energy resources and the renewable energy programs that have been, of course, established here in the state of Hawaii that are pretty advanced when comparative to other states. And so that could be a possibility. But, one of the things that we asked her about was just the hesitancy from local residents, from members of the community like Ernie Lau and the Board of Water Supply of this facility being used for, in the future, maybe another form of fuel or some sort of storage that could continue to do damage for the aquifer. But you heard her there saying that that is not the plan, that they are looking for something completely different, and that she ensured that the defueling continues to move forward and that they will work together with this joint task force to ensure that they can do this as safely and quickly as possible.
Yeah, and interesting to note that she did say that in their defueling and in the decommissioning, they are making it so that no fuel source or toxic chemical can be stored there in the future. What does that actually look like? What do they take apart or put together so that that is not a possibility? We don't know yet. We're still waiting, of course, for more details. This plan is really still in its infancy. And she says now is the time for big ideas. What could that be used for? Renewable energy, water storage? We just don't know. And as one of our viewers brought up, there is the question as to whether or not these tanks can be adequately cleaned and fully defueled, if you will, to make it so that they can be repurposed for something else. We know, as you noted, Ernie Lau has expressed some hesitancy with any kind of repurposing. He's actually our guest this Friday, so we'll get his reaction and see what he says about what he thinks should happen to those tanks and sort of the overall, his assessment of how things are happening at Red Hill. But we really do appreciate having the Assistant Secretary on today. She's a very busy person, and we appreciate the Navy making her available to us. Ultimately, though, one point, Ryan, that she did say, which is something that we all need to keep in mind, is that this is the Navy's facility. Ultimately, it is their call what happens to it. So we'll see how they collaborate with the state to make sure that the community is comfortable with whatever they decide.
Yeah, we'll continue to keep you posted on those discussions. And I'm sure that there will be many announcements about how the community can get involved in that conversation. And so we look to have her back on this program as they begin those conversations and the actual interaction with community members as that time becomes available. As you mentioned, we look forward to that conversation also with Ernie Lau. Always great catching up with him, hearing about what's happening, not only with Red Hill, but also with just the Board of Water Supply, where we're at with storaging. We also talked in the past about desalinization and that plant. So always great to get an update from him. And we know that many people enjoy getting updates from Ernie Lau as well. So we look forward to seeing you right back here on Friday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, take care. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.